Welcome to another live stream from AtPace Academy. Today, I'm really glad to welcome my old friend and accomplished writer, entrepreneur, and CEO, Anirvan Sen. I'll just take a minute to introduce him to you. Anirvan is really experienced in the strategy and leadership segments. He's got more than 25 years of senior management experience across the four big continents. So he's worked in Europe, APAC, South Asia, Middle East and Africa. So he's very, very seasoned. He's worked with some of the largest companies, including General Electric, Stryker, AkzoNobel, Coke, the ManpowerGroup, and the list goes on. His real strength comes from his track record of leading, mentoring, and advising senior business leaders when it comes to growth, capability, mergers and acquisitions, and the transformation that happens as a consequence of that. He's worked in a number of multi-billion-dollar transformation projects, and he has mentored more than 500 plus transformation and change professionals. Over and above this, while he was doing all of this, he's founded 2 companies and written 4 books. So that is an absolute pleasure. The 2 companies that he has founded are Fifth Chrome, which is a transformation and mergers and acquisitions company, and he's got an events company called Roundtable Insights. So I'm super pleased to have him here to talk to us about what's happening in this space. And welcome, Anirvan. What a pleasure to have you back.
The pleasure is all mine, Ravi. Thanks for the invitation, and I love to have these conversations because literally, as we speak, the world needs more of insights than information that we ever did in the past. So super excited to be on today's episode.
Great. I like that you open with insight because that is really what we are trying to drive here. So maybe we can start with your insights from dealing with a post-pandemic recovery in the space of transformation and M&A.
Sure. I think I'll divide that question I'll come at it from 3 different angles. So there were these tectonic shifts that were taking place already. This is pre-pandemic, but they're kind of coming to a convergence right now. So this is, if you remember back in the mid 2000s, we had the 4G. 4G essentially completely changed the way we do things. Even if you look at today's environment, what you'll find is we've got a supercomputer in our pockets, right? If you go back to early 2000s, we were still working with our computers, laptops, we still had emails, but once 4G was there, Facebook came in, LinkedIn came in, and the world changed, and now we feel as if it existed all the time, right? 5G is just entering the market. Every time a new generation telecom has come in, it has changed the way we do things. So which essentially means that 5G is going to drive things very, very differently. Second thing is, after the pandemic, which is there has been a new knowledge or new recognition that work can still be done remotely. Workforce can still be managed remotely. And what that means is, on one side, there would be people who can be hired from any part of the world to do the job. On the other side, the old economy believers would want people to come back to workplace, right? The third part is, if you look at the way technology, the way evolution has taken place, starting from the Industrial Revolution, what we saw was there was a growth of this layer called management layer, which was predominant factor during the 20th century. And management was responsible for managing assets of a company. Majority of them were fixed assets and some variable assets, but fixed assets, right? So it was all about manufacturing, it was all about production, who could do it faster, better, cheaper, right? Whether we talk about General Electric, Toyota, Ford, all of these companies, heavy on assets, Exceptions were banks and insurance, but then they were heavy on intellectual property, right? But as you got into this century, things started changing with the democratization that was driven by digital revolution. That is now also culminating, and the factors, which is the third factor I would say, that's driving the change now is the recognition that in order to drive competitive advantage, you need to have capabilities, and capabilities is driven by 4 things: people, leadership, culture, and organization design. It's not enough to have AI. It's about how do you deploy AI using these four factors. At the end of the day, it's people, it's capabilities, which is why you can see building capabilities for tomorrow, right? So these are the three factors which are converging now. And it is going to be super exciting over the next few years as these pan out.
I think I really like the way that you framed it, because in essence, these three factors are creating a very unique dynamic in the marketplace. So whether that's technology, whether that's capability, or whether that's the working styles or working patterns which are shifting due to these two, are real key in the way that businesses would drive competitive advantage. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit more deeper is, are you seeing differences between the regions in how companies or how countries are coping with these three factors?
Sure. Yeah, great question. I would say the first thing is that we now see, and I'll talk about M&A first, and then I'll talk about in general, the changes in trend. In case of M&A, 20th century was all about asset-heavy companies. 21st century, third decade is going to be all about IP-centric companies, right? This is where you'll get the next unicorns. It's not going to come in from a sugar-producing company, which is going to become a unicorn. It is going to be a digital health tech everywhere. It's technology along with people. With respect to different, let's say, countries and different geographies, interestingly, in the US, while there has been work from home remotely, but what people are essentially missing is the glue that binds people together. Let's call it the organization culture. That's very difficult to drive, let's say, coherency of thinking or the ability to brainstorm new ideas. Because as you and I, we know, when we work in remote environments, it's not very easy to produce new ideas. You can't necessarily do, even though digitally you can do sort of whiteboarding, but it's not the same, okay? And that's missing. So it's going to be a disadvantage for many companies in, let's call it, the developed economies of this world. On the other side, economies like India are now set to boom, even, amplify from where they are. Because now, all of a sudden, as long as you've got technology skills, you can be based in one of the remote parts of India, let's say Begusarai, okay? And you could be working for a company in Hyderabad. Imagine that potential. That's going to be massive. The same thing for large countries like China or any of the other sort of countries in Africa. Once they start getting the infrastructure, or in Southeast Asia, it's going to boom. So the trends are that it's the recognition of what's the new possibility. People have already, last 2 years, they have seen what is not possible. But at the same time, it's the excitement of the new possibility. Hopefully, that is going to drive the way people do things. And that's where I see a different kind of dynamic emerging.
I think that is so true, because if you look at the dynamic, and because I'm based in Singapore, I have the front row seat to what's happening in ASEAN, India, and the broader South Asian continent. So whether that's Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, to a certain extent Sri Lanka, and then what's happening in the ASEAN space, there is a huge potential and there's a huge uptick in the amount of work that's coming through. And people are a lot more open to gigs, and they are a lot more open to getting work done through different mechanisms. And I think that network of talent is really growing. Do you foresee that this will have a knock-on effect to the M&A space, especially if companies trying to gather up, let's say, smaller companies, or would you see this more as a hold pattern where everybody would try and become a unicorn? How do you see that?
Sure. So I would say it's definitely have a knock-on effect on M&A as well as transformation, business transformation, right? And I'll try and address both of them, right? So from an M&A perspective, as I'd already mentioned about skills, talents, capabilities, that's going to play a key differentiator in acquisition. How good or bad an acquisition is and how good or bad a target is. So target for acquisition, the more IP a company has, the more differentiated the company has as capability, that's going to become an attractive proposal, right? And that is going to, if you look at Google hardly has any hardware. It's all about technology, software, and all that stuff.
It's true.
And it's massive. Microsoft, the same thing, massive, right? So it's going to be people centricity. So more and more companies are going to realize this people centricity, right? The second thing is, I call it the obsolescence of skills. The way we have known conventional jobs, back in the 80s, 90s, even 2000s, is going to go through a dramatic shift in the coming decade, right? It is no longer enough to be a marketing person. These days, actually, you don't look for a marketing person. You look for an Insta marketing person, or you look for a Facebook marketing person, right? You look for analytics marketing, right? So we see marketing is already changing. Next will be the sort of the middle office and then the back office. That's where I definitely see, from an M&A perspective, things would also change. So that's like your capability, your skills. The second change I'm going to see in M&A is resources. The kind of people you need in M&A. In the past, it used to be primarily financiers, bankers, lawyers who were central to M&A deals. Going forward, it's going to be the people centricity is going to drive the need of that requirement or the expectation of certain skills that need to be involved in an acquisition, right? So the moment you have people skills involved in large quantity, you would need people who can extract those people skills and drive convergence. Right. Because otherwise, unlike let's say in physical manufacturing companies, you have a factory that's got a value. But with people, the moment people leave, your value starts diminishing. So that's going to be your second part, which is the need for specific experts in order to drive the M&A. So these are two things that are going to drive. The third thing is, and that's where, my fourth book, which I'm writing right now, talks about, is how do you engage people in order to drive exponential growth? One of the key points that people miss out is during an acquisition, especially majority of the acquisitions are the companies that get acquired are 5 to 20 times smaller than the acquiring company.
Yeah.
Okay. What that means is that if you look at the investment thesis of the selling company, majority of the times you will find this company operates in this environment, which has got massive potential. The target addressable market for the company is massive. In other words, this company can get exponential growth if you want. Okay. Now, a large company, when they acquire, the expectation normally is, or not the expectation, the way people behave is they want the smaller company people to start behaving the larger company. So all of a sudden, where you had the need or where you had the possibility of the smaller company to grow exponentially, all of a sudden, because now they're part of the larger company, they go into an incremental growth, which means you completely kill the opportunity to grow exponentially. Some companies have already started realizing that, and therefore the companies that have started realizing that are able to ring fence these companies and get them the exponential growth. Because guess what? If this company gets the exponential growth post acquisition, it's your growth.
That is
right?
True.
Yeah. So
True.
These are the three things I would say would be driving, let's say, the people centricity in the future in the space of M&A.
I think that is a really key insight, because one of the challenges that even I had working with acquisitions, whether it was being acquired or we were acquiring, is this whole mindset of leadership to think about bringing them into our culture or adapting them to become like us. But the only reason why you bought them to begin with is because you saw that they had something which you didn't have.
Correct.
Right? So I think there is this whole interesting balance between those two elements. So I pick up those two pieces which are quite key to what you said. One, IP companies will have a lot more lucrative value. But one of the challenges of acquiring companies is going to be how can you continue to keep their culture so that you can really drive that exponential growth using the IP rather than making them similar to yourself and driving all the talent away. So I think this is going to be sort of very, very key in the way that it's going to work. One question that comes up in the space of M&A, which I keep thinking about, and I want to pick your brains on it, is really the factor of acquisition versus connected ecosystems and co-option. So those are two really strong possibilities when you want to grow inorganically. How do you see this space play out? Do you see us moving more towards connected ecosystems, towards networks and co-option or cooperation? Or or do you see more in the space of acquisition and integration?
Absolutely brilliant question, and you've kind of read my mind, because one of the other points that I wanted to mention is that in the future you would need this connected ecosystem that will act as a catalyst to bring the two companies together, right? Because literally it's very expensive and it's not going to be viable in the future for companies to maintain their own integration teams at scale, okay? And that's where they will probably need to do with the ecosystem. Now, to your question, it is not something that connected ecosystem did not exist in the past, okay? If you look at Build, Borrow, or Buy, which is a book that's been written, it's on Amazon. I'll give you the link and the name of the book, the authors. They talk about how critical is the skill set going to be, right, from your own perspective. So you tend to build the capabilities within you, right? The second part is, depending on the criticality and depending on how tightly have you defined what you need, you could also do a borrow, which is a contract, contracting with a third party, right? That's a second stage. You want a bit more vested interest of the other party, you get into a joint venture. And then when you have full control, you go and do an acquisition, right? So 4 stages.
Right.
The problem is that majority of the people, especially the senior leadership, they want to exercise control from day one.
Yeah.
So they jump from build to buy.
Yeah.
Okay. So the middle portion is not explored that much, right? Now, while I personally believe that there is going to be a lot more need for the ecosystem, as I said, talent obsolescence is going to be there. Second thing is going to be, it's very expensive. It's going to be very expensive to maintain all sorts of talent. Third is that the talent is going to be short-lived. When I say short-lived, the need for the talent is going to be short-lived.
Yeah.
Because more and more we're going to get to project-based activities in an organization. Fourth is we're going to need multifunctional talent. Not just somebody who have finance background or who has HR background, but somebody who's got a combination. So given all of this, you are going to find it extremely difficult to maintain all of the skills in-house. So you will need to depend on the skills outside, right? The problem is that even in the third decade of the 21st century, majority of the companies' leadership, senior leadership, are still stuck in the 20th century thinking. In other words, they want control. They want to run companies with command and control, right?
Yeah.
And that is what is not going to let them take advantage of ecosystems. They would like to be in control. So which is why in acquisitions, a large number of acquisitions fail, is because the moment you buy a company, it's like, oh, now I'm going to control this company. Absolutely the wrong attitude. Okay. And again, I can understand those larger companies tend to operate in a command and control fashion. Everything is either governed by policies and procedures or by the command and control of senior management, etc., right? Whereas the new age companies, they're a lot more network, a lot more sort of flexible. So which is why, back to your question, the command and control attitude of the senior management, conventional 20th century thinking, is going to be a big factor that's going to prevent people to go and take advantage of the network's skills available. The future is going to be that. The question is, how do companies overcome this hurdle and get there?
How should people contact you if they wanted to collaborate with you? What's the best way to reach you?
The best way to reach me would be through LinkedIn, and you can find Anirvan and Fifth Chrome. You could use both the spellings, the number 5 or the one that is there on Ravi's screen, which is FIFTHCHROME. But please make sure that you do send in a message that you have heard this or listened to this or seen this podcast, because I do get a lot of spammy requests, just to make sure that I can differentiate. So LinkedIn is the best. Otherwise, you could also get in touch with me through our website or through our other channels, YouTube channel, which we have, that people can get in touch with. Yeah. So those would be the ones to connect with me. And I would love to connect with like-minded people.
Absolutely. And I think it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. I know that you've had a really tough few weeks. So I wish you well, and I look forward to welcoming you again.
Thanks a ton, Ravi. Enjoyed the conversation as usual when we meet up. So this has been brilliant, and you made my day. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. And thanks so much for sharing your insight.
Thank you.